Well, I have a fun job, but I'm not going to talk about the fun parts. I'm going to talk about the problems that we've had, about the hard parts. I want to start with two questions. The first question is, why do successful companies fail? Now, I grew up around this whole industry of computers and as it went through this remarkable revolution, and saw a lot of companies come and go, but there were two that stand out in my mind. One was Evans and Sutherland, which is located in Salt Lake. And this was one of the pioneering companies in computer graphics, and they had the lead. They had more knowledge and expertise than anybody else, and they were in the best position to take that knowledge and go to the next level as a company. But they made some decisions that in which basically they lost that lead. And a new company leapt to the front, and that was Silicon Graphics, founded by Jim Clark, who incidentally used to work for Evans and Sutherland. And SGI had this remarkable run. They built the graphics machines that was used throughout the world for a variety of visualization and graphics techniques. A lot of software was built on it. The revolution in computer graphics in the entertainment industry was built on their machines. They had everything. But they made two serious mistakes. And the things about these serious mistakes was there were several people on the outside who could look at that and say, that's a really bad idea. You shouldn't do that. Nevertheless, they did it, and they lost the lead. They lost the lead to NVIDIA, incidentally made up of former SGI employees. And they did some remarkable things, and they, with ATA, are still out in the lead. But the company that had that lead was SGI and all the knowledge. Now, the people that said they were making the wrong decision, in some ways they're like Cassandra, where you're telling the truth, but the people don't listen. And Cassandra was cursed with being able to see the future, but not having people believe her. And it felt like that kind of situation here. The reason I start with this question was, at that time, while all this is going on, I'm with this struggling company, and we're trying to figure out how to make things work. And we start off with a company. It's just hard, and that was a very difficult task. But I'm thinking, if we're ever successful, how do I keep from falling into the traps that these companies are falling into? And it's not like they get blindsided by something which catches them totally off guard. This stuff is really pretty obvious. They're missing the obvious. The second question relates to a dinner that I had with a studio executive, the head of a studio, a couple years ago. And he said at that, actually it was a lunch, he said at that lunch, our central problem is not finding good people, it's finding good ideas. So that was an interesting expression. So as I gave talks for the next while after that, I would pose that question to the audience and ask them whether or not they agreed with him. And what I found was that in every case, the audience was split 50-50. It's really pretty astonishing. Didn't matter whether they were students, experienced business executives, artists, high school teachers. They all split. Some thought he was right, half thought he was wrong. Well, let me come back to that second question later. So now let me step into the story, which is in 91, when our company was about 5 years old and went through the various hells you go through when you're starting a company, we finally got our chance, and we entered into a relationship with Disney to make the first computer animated film, Toy Story. And at that time, we got a few things right. We did have a culture where the artists and the technical people were peers with each other. They socialized with each other. They each thought the other was world class. The compensation structure was the same. They were allowed to intermarry. If there were problems, and there were always problems, people felt comfortable about coming in and expressing the problems. We couldn't fix every problem, but it's important to hear them. The other thing we had was something which we called the brain trust. We had a certain group of people who were very remarkable at telling stories. And part of being remarkable was not only that they were funny and focused and good at storytelling, but they had complete trust in each other. And they were very, and often, what you might call brutally honest, except for them they didn't think of it as brutally honest, they thought of it as necessarily honest. And it was always taken that way. It was never a matter of ego or putting somebody down. It was always about the story. And therefore you could say something hard and it was taken in the right spirit. And getting that kind of camaraderie in a key group of people is just gold. And it's an amazing group. And to this day, it's an amazing group of people. So we got that right. We had a review process that was actually a combination of some things that John had learned from Disney, along with things that were at ILM at Lucasfilm. But it was unique because of that combination. But what it amounted to was that in the process of making the film, we reviewed the material every day. Now, this is counterintuitive for a lot of people. Most people, you can imagine this, you can't draw very well. But even if you can draw very well, suppose you come in and you've got to put together animation or drawings and show it to a famous world-class animator. Well, you don't want to show something which is weak or poor. So you want to hold off into it until you get it to be right. And the trick is actually to stop that behavior. We show it every day when it's incomplete. If everybody does it every day, then you get over the embarrassment. And when you get over the embarrassment, you're more creative. And that's, as I say, it's not obvious to people, but starting down that path helped everything that we did. Show it in its incomplete form. There's another advantage to doing that, and that is when you're done, you're done. Now, that might seem silly, except that a lot of people, they work on something and they want to hold it and they want to show it, let's say, 2 weeks later to get done, only it's never right. So they're not done. So you need to go through this iterative process, and the trick was to do it more frequently to change the dynamics. Also, as we started up in making this film, we brought in a new group of people because we had artists, we had technical people, but we never made a movie before. So we didn't have a group of people who were really production managers. They were the ones keeping track of things, making sure that the material went from place to place. You get literally millions of things that are going on. There's a lot to manage, a lot to take care of. So you needed people who thought that way and were experienced with it. So this is this new group coming in from Los Angeles. So we finished the film, and the film was a big success. Went way beyond what anybody thought. It was a great start to this new field of computer animation. And we were building a company. We went public at that time. In fact, we went public 1 week after the film opened. And it was the biggest IPO of the year, in fact. And we wanted people to see our product before they invested. And it just went well. It was a great whirling event. But at that time, or just prior to going public, we had to start on the next film because you can't just have one product and that's it. You've got to keep coming out with them. And we're very aware there's a second product syndrome where you kind of overdo it in the second one and you blow it. So we got somebody working on the second one, and as the team started to roll off with Toy Story, we began to put them on the new film, which is Bug's Life. And so then we met with the artists and said, this is great, let's move on to the next film. We met with the technical people, and they said, great, we're ready for it. And we met with the production managers. They said, what? We don't like it here. We want to quit. So we uncovered this major problem. They felt like they were second-class citizens. They felt like people treated them second class. So I went around and asked people among the artists and the technical people, and sure enough, they thought the production manager was second class. Right. It's all true. They thought there were impediments, that they were getting in the way of getting the job done. So we had this major disaster. So the first question is, what was the problem? And then I want to come back to the deeper thing for me. Making a movie is a very organized activity. And so what was happening is, because it's so organized and there's so much stuff going on, you can easily lose control of it, that we had this very hierarchical structure in place. And the various people there wanted to make sure that all the information went through the proper channels, as it went up the hierarchy and down the hierarchy, so that everything happened in the right place. And that whole notion of controlling that information flow pissed everybody off. And yet there was a feeling we had to maintain control. The key concept we realized at that time was that we had confused the organizational structure with the communication structure. A very common thing that happens in a lot of companies. They are different. Yes, you must be organized. Things must happen in order. You can lose control. But communication needs to be able to happen between anybody in the company at any time. It really is, it's peer-to-peer, right? It's the notion you can go to anybody else. Yes, let your managers know, but you have to go anywhere. And open door policy frequently means you can go to the head of the company. But open door policy to us means anybody can go to anybody anytime. It's very important. And once we actually broke that down, things changed dramatically. The other part of that, though, and this is the harder thing for people to realize, and that is that for managers, the one thing you hate as a manager is to be surprised. So you don't like to walk into a meeting and find out something for the first time in the meeting. In fact, it's kind of a sign of disrespect if you weren't told before the other people in the meeting. And if you've got everybody thinking that way, you got a problem. So one of the tricks for managers is to learn is you don't need to be the first person to learn. Don't get upset. Get over it. It actually doesn't matter. In fact, that somebody else talked about the problem ahead of time is a good thing, not a sign of disrespect. Okay, so the other question, which was the difficult one for me, was why had I missed this problem? We were off making this film, everybody's having a good time, and I'm looking for it. I thought I had a great relationship, open door, everything like that. Totally missed it. Well, part of the reason was that there was a group of new people that came into an existing structure. They accepted it. They were used to reporting to producers. And if you didn't like it, well, you're only on the job for 4 months, and you just put up with it and you'd move on. So there was no reason for them to complain, just put up with it. The other problem, though, was that they really did like the fact that they were working on a groundbreaking film. It was very exciting to be making history. They loved that. They loved working for John Lasseter. So I realized that because they loved a lot of things, they were willing to put up with stuff that they didn't like. And this is one of the fundamental problems, I think, with companies, and that is that success hides problems. It happens to a lot of us in our personal lives, with our health. When we're healthy, we may do a lot of things that are bad for us, but our health lets us get away with doing stuff that's bad for us. Then years later, the logic at that time doesn't hold up, but we do that. It happens with a lot of companies. It happens with state, local, and national governments. When you're healthy and you've got the resources, you don't need to address the problems. And when I look at a lot of the companies, I look at SGI and so forth, they were actually very healthy and they're very strong. And the problems were there, but they didn't have to look at them at that time. They let the success, and they were successful at that time, they let that get in the way of diving deep into finding the problems. So even though I was kind of aware of this problem, I'd been caught by it too. So just being aware of it wasn't enough. So the next stage for us while we're making Bug's Life is we started to make a sequel to Toy Story. Now the logic initially, which came from Disney, was if you have a successful film, you need to have follow-on things to keep the characters alive. And at that time, it was to make direct-to-video sequels. So we picked a couple of animators to give them a chance to direct this picture, put together a team, started to make this film. Well, right away, we ran into a problem. And that was that one group was making a direct-to-video sequel, which is essentially like B or C level of expectation and quality. On the other team, the A team was working on Bug's Life, where you've got the very best people, and the expectation is we have to match Toy Story. Well, this wasn't good, we realized. You got two different standards of quality under the same roof. We realized this actually isn't good for our souls to do that. We shouldn't be thinking that it's okay to be doing something which isn't great. So fairly early on, we actually stopped that. We decided to make Toy Story a theatrical release. So we decided that, okay, we've got to go for the A quality. Now, incidentally, when you make a film, when you start to make it, it isn't very good. When you put the reels together and you get the story, if it's really good, you're almost done. Right. But when you're starting, you're not almost done. So you've got to go through a lot of steps to get there. And what you want to see is every 6 months or 3 months, whenever you do a reel, you want to see a step forward. And sometimes you make a step back, but in general, you want to take that step forward. What we found was this was sort of hovering around not being very good. And just lots of issues weren't right, and the directors didn't get along, and the producers were having problems, and it wasn't a very functional team. So I went to John, who's focused on Bug's Life, and said, we got a problem here. He said, don't worry, trust the process, it'll get to be better. Well, it wasn't getting any better. So in 1998, Bug's Life was finished. And there was a worldwide tour, and John went on that tour. But he knew that when he returned, that he then had to address the issue of Toy Story 2. Now, Toy Story 2, as he returned, had to be delivered in 9 months. All right, so it was already a tight schedule for where they were. So he came back. He watched Toy Story 1 before he came into work from his trip to Europe. Came in, watched the reels, and walked in and said, "You're right, we've got a major problem." So basically, we took the A team, we put them on the project. We went down to Disney and said, the film isn't good enough, we have to throw it away and start all over again. And the answer was, well, actually, it's better than you think. We think it is good enough. But more importantly, it's too late. You literally do not have the time between now and you have to deliver it to redo this film. So we said, it's not good enough. And we know we don't have enough time, but we're going to do it anyway. So we came back. John told the story crew to take a good rest over the holidays and come back on January 2nd. We were reboarding the movie. So we then started, and we now had 8 months left. We then started this incredibly intense effort to get this movie out. It was boarded quickly. It was pitched to the company. It was an electrifying pitch. We had a lot of overachieving people working for overachieving managers to get the movie out. Worked brutal hours with this. When I say brutal, we had a number of people that were injured with RSI. One of them permanently left the field. We had actually a married couple that worked there, and this is in June, so it's summer. And the father was supposed to drop the baby off at daycare, but forgot, don't know why, but came and left the baby in the car and came into work. And again, as the heat was rising, the mother asked about it, and they realized they rushed out, the baby was unconscious. The right thing was done, they put ice water on the baby, and the baby ended up being fine in the end, but it's one of those traumatic things, like why did this happen, are they working too hard? So when I say it's intense, I mean it really was intense. Well, the film was finished on time, and it was a huge success. I mean, many people think that it was better than the first one. But we learned several things from that. One, I should say, on the activity of working so hard, we adopted new ways the way we work in terms of the RSI. We hired a full-time ergonomist and a doctor nurse coming in twice a week. A masseuse is available all the time. We limit the number of hours that people can work. There's a whole number of things that we instituted and really got people to take this seriously, have Pilates and yoga classes, soccer, everything just to keep people physically fit, to realize they're in for the long haul. The reason I say this, though, is because it's kind of a side note, but it turns out that this program costs money, which of course we're going to do anyway. But what we found after we did this was that the injury rate dropped dramatically. The insurance company lowered our premiums, and the reduction in premiums more than paid for the entire cost of the program. I say that because some people think they can't afford this kind of stuff, and I think the answer is that it can be afforded and should be. On the issue of the film itself, it wasn't working. But what wasn't that wasn't working? Because it turns out that the theme of the story was actually the same. It was about a toy that gets stolen by the toy collector and ultimately has to make this choice. It wasn't working as a movie. And the reason was that the movie's coming out from Pixar and Disney, so you know that Woody's going to end up with his original family. If you know what the end is before you start, you don't have a movie. So you need to have people believe that he has a real choice to make. And so when they came back and reboarded it, that's when they add Jessie Song, who talked about her growing up, and she was the darling of this little girl, but the little girl grew up and moved on. And that's really what happens. And that was her message to Woody. It says, yes, you may like the situation you were in, but life goes on. It changes. You can't hang on to that. And that's something that's true, right? We all know that. And because of it, we can relate to why there's a hard decision that has to be made. And so the things that are put in the movie are to get it so that it relates to decisions that we all have seen or we can appreciate and that we can therefore enjoy as a movie. And it's what turns it into a real movie instead of just some cheap follow-on. So I come back to the first question, which is more important, or what's the central problem, finding good ideas or finding good people? And the answer is very clear. The idea was the same. If you have a good idea and you give it to a mediocre group, they'll screw it up. If you give a mediocre idea to a good group, they'll fix it, or they'll throw it away and come up with something else. The other thing to know is there is a confusion, I think, that people have, and is because the books and press kind of work this way, and we think about an idea. I mean, think of ideas for movies, but you think about ideas for products. And it's usually thought of as some singular thing. But the reality is these successful movies, as well as successful products, have got thousands of ideas. There's all sorts of things necessary to make it be successful. And you have to get most of them right to do it. And that's why you need a team that works well together. Now, we had a development department at the time, and our development department was structured just as it was with other studios. That is, it's a group of people looking for ideas to make into movies. And as we went through this, we realized we're thinking about it in the wrong way. The goal of development is not to find good ideas. It's to put together teams of people that function well together. And that change just altered the way we thought about making movies. And to this day, this development department is loved by the directors because it's a support group. It's not somebody telling them what to do. It's not a gate. It's a support group. The directors, because we're a director-driven studio, are the ones who are responsible for the movie. And everything else is to support them. And the way we measure progress is how well that team gets together. Because initially, the films they put together, they're a mess. It's like everything else in life. The first time you do it, it's a mess. And sometimes it's labeled, well, the first time it's a failure. But it's not even the right word to use, right? It's just like you get the first one out, you'll learn from it, and the only failure is if you don't learn from it, if you don't progress. So the way we measure it is like, is this team functioning well together? And it's a thing that's never let us down. When that team functions well, they will succeed. When things are going wrong, they will fail. So for me, Toy Story 2 was the defining moment for the studio. Our third movie was our defining moment. It set the way we think about things and still do. Now, around this time, we were successful. A lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon. One of the unfortunate consequences is that 2D animation in this country was actually shut down because they thought the audience lost the taste for 2D and they just wanted 3D. It was all nonsense. It had nothing to do with the technology had to do with the story. But unfortunately, people like to copy the wrong things. Now, people do copy things. And it's the bizarrest thing, because copying in some ways is a form of learning. So you can say, well, I'll learn from what everybody else did, and then I'll copy that. But in many respects, it's shallow. It's sort of like, if you think about movies, sometimes you see people do a remake of a movie, but you notice that they always remake good movies, and rarely do they beat the good movie. But the fact is, there are thousands of movies out there that are actually a great idea, but they're poorly executed. They should be remaking bad movies. Right? Or what does it happen with products? The ones that do better aren't those that just copy somebody else's good product. They actually take the thing that's going wrong and fix that. Right? That's the better idea. So anyway, what we found was all of a sudden everybody's trying to copy what we're doing. And they could copy the technology, but they couldn't copy the process we were used to come up with a story. Now, even though we have this great brain trust, though, and a lot of experience, and learned all this, things didn't get any easier. We kind of hoped at some point you get under your belt and it gets easier, but it didn't get easier. So we instituted a process of doing postmortems after every movie, trying to do a deep analysis. The first postmortems were very successful. We worked very hard to make sure people were safe. They didn't get shot for pointing out problems. And everybody got a lot out of them. They valued them greatly. So we're off to a good start. But then as you go on to the next postmortem, people began to game the system. And it turns out people know the value, they know they should do them, but they don't like to do it. So why don't they like to do the postmortems? Why don't they like to do the analysis? Well, they're kind of tired. They've been working on something for 3 years. They don't want to think about it anymore. Some people are defensive. Some people feel that one of the things they want to do in these meetings is make their team feel good. Look what we did. So it's not really an in-depth analysis. And for us, then, the task is to keep pushing this, because unless we do the in-depth analysis, we will always go for the easy thing. Because, again, it's when you're successful, when the film goes off right, you kind of like to stop at that point and just sort of bask in it and not dive deeper. So what we found is we have to change the way we do the postmortems every single film, because in the next film, they'll game it. But if we can change it in the right way, then it will work. So the latest thing we're doing until it gets gamed is we're asking them to pick from their process the 5 things that they would do again and the 5 things they wouldn't do again. We try to get both to get the balance. What we're really interested in the things that they wouldn't do again. But you try to get both out there. On the other, and this is a fairly important one, is to get a lot of facts about the process. When you put the facts up and you're fact-driven, it actually stimulates discussion, and it's those discussions which are very valuable. And you come out of that, we have a new theory about how to do things, and we would get it, we'd come up with a new way of doing it, and we'd get that every time about 2/3 right and 1/3 wrong. And you never know what the mix is going to be, but roughly it's like 1/3 of the stuff you try to do is just bogus because you called it wrong. But that's okay. At least you got 2/3 right. So let me summarize a few of the things we've learned. One is the constant review. The second is it must be safe for people to tell the truth. Third is that communication should not mirror the organizational hierarchy. People and how they function is more important than ideas. And do not let success mask problems. Do a deep assessment. Now, having said those things, it's part of the culture of Pixar. And, there's another problem. So let me set this up by discussing another discovery. Early on, we came to believe that story is the most important thing in a process. It led our decision-making process. And so as we had a lot of different pulls, we'd come back to this driving principle. It's the story that counts. And we thought this is one of the things that made us successful. This was this realization. And now, so having said that, and we would say that, and we'd tell people about it, and we made all the sacrifices for it. And then I discovered as I was listening around that every studio says the same thing. everybody says the story is the most important thing, even if the story was drivel. It might be true, in fact, it is true, but it doesn't affect behavior. Now, when I say story is the most important thing, I think the analogy with a lot of companies is probably quality is the most important thing. It's one of those things that's true, and you agree it's true, and you say it. That doesn't mean anything. Now, when I first started Pixar, I came out of a pure technical background, I had to learn a lot about business quickly, and I hadn't gone to any school, so I just read a lot of books. And there were a few bits and pieces, but I got to say, for the most part, I didn't get a lot of traction with them. Tried a variety of things. So I said, well, maybe the problem is I got to get to the essence of them. So there's a service that gets the summaries of business books. So I tried that, and I read those. And that was actually an amazing experience, because in reading the essence of the books, I realized they were content-free. So I thought, well, what's going on here? Is it the fact that the book doesn't have any content, which is probably true in many cases? Another thing is it that you can't take some of these things and reduce them in a meaningful way, which I suspect is also true. I ran into a similar thing. This just happened a while ago. It's similar to the story is the most important thing. It comes out of the world of architecture. And at that time, we were looking at building a building. Actually, this last year. And I know there's some buildings down there which are abysmal. I mean, they're just awful buildings. And so I started talking with our building person up at Pixar as we're coordinating to get these built. He explained to me the concept in architecture of building from the inside, or designing from the inside out, as opposed from the outside in. And outside in is the bad one. You get the look of the building, and sort of that dictates what you're doing. You end up with poor buildings. And inside out is where you think about the functions, the way people work, and that sort of dictates things, and you try to make it look good from the outside. So in that world, inside out is good, and outside in is bad. So then I met with an architect who was responsible for one of the buildings. And he used the phrase that he designed the buildings from the inside out. But the building he designed was a disaster. So I realized, it's the same thing. The phrase is important in this community. It just doesn't have any effect on behavior. So the principle is, once one can articulate an important idea into a concise statement, then one can use the statement and not have to have the fear of changing behavior. And I see this over and over again. So I can summarize some of these things, but the real issue is, what do we do? I mean, not even what we say about it. What are the things that we do? Every product that we're making has got to be original, which implies that we can never repeat ourselves. Now, to me, it's an important thing, because a lot of people in Hollywood actually don't understand that. If something is successful, if you've got Stars or Shrek, or Star Wars or Shrek or whatever, then basically, let's do that again. Right? We'll make it a little bit different. We'll try to do the same thing again. But you can't think that way. With any products, everything is new and original, and therefore our way of dealing with and solving the problems has got to be an original. So the secret is we have to keep on digging deeper and deeper and knowing that we're always missing something that's important. So let me return to the first question. Why do successful companies fail? For that matter, why do golden ages end? I do believe that human organizations, are inherently unstable. They will fall over, and you have to work to keep them upright. But they fall slowly. Most people don't notice it. They let their success blind them. They don't see it falling over. The falling takes place slow, but the collapse is quick. You have to do constant assessment. You have to look for the hard truths. I mentioned Cassandra before. It's the Greek myth, and again, she's cursed with seeing the truth, but nobody will believe her. I don't think the Greeks had it right, actually. I think the curse is on the people that don't listen. Right? We have to be the ones who are looking for it all the time, and when we hear things, evaluate it. Is it right? I think in the movies, in our process, we have various crises, but there are two fundamental kinds of crises. One is that you don't like what you see, so you have to make changes. Now, the fact that you make changes is not in and of itself a crisis. That's just hard work. What makes a crisis is there are a lot of people with vested interests and with positions, and you've got to actually rearrange things, and it's people butting up against each other. And that's a hard thing to do. It's an emotional thing to do. But you do that, and you end up making a better film. The second kind of crisis is you release the film, and the audience doesn't like it. Now, at that point, it's too late to do anything about it. But the difference between the two crises is that the first one is self-imposed. And that's the important part. Now, in this talk, I focused on our problems, and the tone might be a little downbeat in some of this. But as I say, I haven't talked about the fun part. But this approach and thinking about it and always diving deeper and questioning has let us assemble the best people in the industry. It's the most extraordinary team I worked with. We are in this extraordinary building up at Pixar it's one of the greatest places to work. We have a lot of fun together and a lot of laughter, and our job is to keep it going. Thank you. Take some questions?
Could you please stand when you ask questions so the camera can take?
You mentioned that Silicon Graphics made two crucial mistakes. What were they?
In my opinion, was they bought Cray Computer. All right. The second one was they came out with an add-in PC board, and it was not successful. And they reached the conclusion that it was not a good idea. All right. Rather than saying the first one's not successful, what should we do to make it successful? Because that basically is the way the whole industry is structured now. And it was really it was not taking the information they learned from that first failure, if you will, and turning it into a success.
How do you document this, and how do you make sure that this knowledge that you're gaining is actually turning into something practical? Was there somebody documenting this and writing down the process to work on, or how would you do it?
One is in all of our meetings, whether creative or postmortem, we have note takers, and they're staff members, but they're really good. They just keep track of everything. The second thing is that the people in preparing for it actually get a lot of information. It's the people in charge who go through the process and in thinking through it get a lot of their information. And the people who are then presenting to are frequently the leaders of a follow-on film. So there's a direct handoff in communication. And just having the discussion surfaces a lot of issues. So it's a variety of things. Excuses why they don't do it are frequently like, well, I've already started the next process, so it's too late. The postmortem happens too late for me. So there are things like that which get in the way, in addition to people not wanting to do it. So for me, it's saying, okay, we all know it's good, but it's like your medicine. You got to do it, or it's like your vitamins. It's something you take. You need to do it. Yes.
You talked about collecting facts. So how effective or ineffective was evidence-based management? Collecting facts that actually help you in the future, that later on the second or third projects, or did it actually not help you? Did people actually like that?
The process of gathering the evidence is mixed. That is, we're fairly good at it, and we're getting better at it, but there are a number of times you get into something you haven't kept track of all the detail. In general, when we actually gather the facts and we present it, then the reaction of most people is like they're just fascinated by it, because they're flying by their gut, which is pretty good, but there are things they missed, the facts show. And people don't let facts override judgment, but it actually is sometimes give you pictures you can't see otherwise. So it's very well appreciated at Pixar. And we've got, in fact, there's a graduate from Stanford University, Ali Rogani, who's brilliant, and he is extremely good at taking facts and teasing out important information. And you present that important information in really concise ways, and it's things that people didn't see before. So the fact they see that means they want to participate, and it helps them commit to gathering facts in the future. So it's a very successful way of working. Yes?
The second question that you raised, finding good people versus good ideas. Have you discovered, I think they kind of go hand in hand. So have you really reached a conclusion that they really should go together as opposed to it's like one versus the other?
Okay, where do the ideas come from? The reason for phrasing it that way, because you essentially need the new and the fresh ideas, is what you're doing is giving credit and camaraderie to a team of people. You can't give that to an idea. And what you're trying to do is have the people work well together. So I'd much rather say the people are the important thing, and they're going to come up with the ideas. If I say the idea is the important thing, and they say, okay, what idea do I come up with? You know, you have to support them. So that's why I do put the people first, because the ideas are a process that results from the people working well together. I mean, the result of the people working well together. Yes?
Two quick things. First, is there any way to share the Pixar process with the Pentagon, the State Department, the White House? I think that would be great. If you could, I think we could use it. And then the second thing is, how do you track audience? How do you segment and track audience interests? And is that something that's changed and evolved over time as you're doing these films?
Well, on the first question, oh God, I wish. No, I do believe there's a notion of self-assessment which is unfortunately lacking. I think one of the things, if I look at the left and the right, fundamentally they actually don't trust people. The thing I like about the center is that it's more based on trust, not that mistakes aren't made. But when I look at the extremes, it's like we're going to impose something, and it's not a trusting mechanism. And I think the notion of self-assessment is apolitical. It doesn't matter, whether Republican or Democrat. Some people sort of get the notion of honest assessment, and some people don't because they've got an agenda. And we all know that, and we see the results. And we talk about, I said, when the golden age is in. Well, even at the national level, are we guaranteed that America will be great in 200 years? We have no guarantees. We have no guarantees that any company will be around, or all of it requires constant diligence and a thought process, which is say we have responsibility in making it better. As far as heading for an audience, we don't target a group like when say we're going after. In particular, we don't go after kids. All right, it's a bad idea to target films for little kids for two reasons. One is it essentially is talking down to them. And if you talk down to them, they don't like it that much. And for adults, it's very boring. The truth is, children live in an adult world, and they're used to hearing things they don't understand. So our approach is we want to make movies that we enjoy. There's a physical humor and physical comedy that comes from acting, from animation, the kids do enjoy. So there's a thing that they do like. And obviously, we don't put in things into our movies that would offend families or their children. But we write the dialogue and the story for us. We want them to be meaningful to us. And that's how we think about it. We will do some late screenings after the story is fairly well along, partly because if you've seen a movie over and over again, you actually lose perspective on it. So sometimes you just need to have somebody who's never seen it before, and you just sit there in the room, and it sort of opens up your eyes. You don't even record anything. You just see things that's different. So, and that's more the way the feedback works. Yes?
Talk a little bit about the evolution from a product company, RenderMan, to a services company. It looks like a brilliant move now, but I'm wondering, 10 years ago, did you have to transform the company and the culture? Was it as obvious a decision as it turned out to be?
Well, when we formed the company, we spun off from Lucasfilm, and initially we sold a hardware product, which was an image computer. And that was rough. That's when I was reading all the books, and I got advice. I called Jim Clark and the head of Sun. I'm drawing a blank here. Scott McNeely, for advice. And it turns out that a well-meaning advice, but it turns out it was the wrong advice. because it wasn't appropriate what we were doing. I didn't know enough to sort of figure some of this out. It was hard, and we got into the software business. We then did the Render-Man software, and we started doing commercials. But I got to tell you, we kept losing money. Didn't matter what we did. The one nice thing is that our investor was Steve Jobs. And now, mind you, I mean, in one sense, Steve he's not known for being patient, but the reality is that he was patient with us, right? He was funding our education. And so by the time we got the chance for the big one, which was the movie, we'd been through a lot. We had bonded together as a team. And he'd funded that education, but then it came back in spades because we worked together with him as a team to build this rather remarkable place. And it was really cool, really, to have an investor sort of understood what we were doing and what we were going for, which really helped change the industry. So we moved over into filmmaking. So we're actually not in service anymore, except for the fact we do still sell Render-Man. So it's this really nice business. It's almost all the special effects you see in movies are using the software that we sell. It's the only piece of software that we do sell. We don't sell any of our other animation software because we think there's a certain advantage we have. But in this case, we like the fact that there's an industry-wide standard. Yes?
How important do you think has been in this successful process of telling stories the fact that you work with animated actors instead of real-life actors? And where do you see the industry heading?
Well, when we make films, the question is animated actors versus live-action actors. The characters in our films are really a combination of the writers and the story team putting it together, the design, and the animators and the physical acting, and the voice of the actors. Since we picked and select actors who've got really remarkable voice, it's really that collection that creates a character. And it's part of the animation, so it's just different than live action. The time scale is different. The way that it's put together is different. And in both live action and animation, you can also do it badly and you can do it well. It just depends upon talent. Yes?
You mentioned that Pixar was a Lucas spin-off, and obviously there have been other very successful Lucas spin-offs like Photoshop and Digital Domain and Telltale and others. What is it about Lucas veterans that makes them successful entrepreneurs, and do you see the same characteristics in Disney veterans?
Well, George Lucas was really remarkable in that, having produced Star Wars, he believed that bringing technology into the industry would benefit it. And so the job that I was given when I came into Lucasfilm in 1979 was to bring high technology into the industry. So that meant digital audio, video editing, computer graphics, and games. So nobody else was funding it in this industry except for George. So I was able to go out and hire the best people in each one of these areas. So that was a great activity to be engaged with. Now, in the end, it's a filmmaking company, and he had sort of like this hotbed of ideas and good people, so there was some spin-out from that. So this was a computer division. Within ILM, they didn't actually spin out of the companies. It was actually people it's because they were successful that some people were stolen away to start competing companies. But it wasn't as if ILM had spun them out. And in the case of Photoshop, the original one was written by John Knowles, who is the Knowles brothers, one of whom is still there and is a soup tech for making films, and a rather remarkable one. But it was early sold off to Adobe, and its big change has actually been through Adobe. But part of it is there's something about the environment where you've got technology and art together that's a great mix, and it's a nice place to be. And if you think about it, and most people don't think about it this way because they think of films like the old-fashioned. But when Walt Disney started off back in the 30s with this, it was a technological revolution. Films were new, color was new, sound was new. So he was the first one to put sound in there. He was the first one to put color. He locked up Technicolor for a while. So there are a lot of things. He was adopting every technology as it came along, and that mix of the technology and the artist provided or made this environment where a lot of cool things were happening. And you look back in the past and you sort of focus on the art without realizing what was the environment that made that. And over a while, that environment sort of went away. And then the new environment basically picked up at Lucasfilm and then at Pixar, where there's the mix of the artist and the technical together. And now realizing that and seeing what happened then and what happened now, it's very important for us to keep the technology changing, keep it mixed up. Sometimes the individuals don't always see that, they look at it from their point of view, but you have to look at it as a whole ecosystem. And having that mixture together, which is sort of like what a university is supposed to be, right? A lot of things happening in one place just stimulates you to think about things in new and innovative ways. Back there.
Could you have successfully managed Pixar without your technical background to the success that it is today?
Well, I don't know. I always look at Pixar as really having the combination of a variety of people there. And I brought one way of looking at things. John brought something, Steve Jobs brought something, and there were various other people who brought something to the mix. And it was the balance. You know, there are things that could have gone wrong in that, and then that wouldn't have happened. But, you know, and none of us even point and say, you know, any of us did it alone. It really took all of us together to do that. So I can't separate out my background and say, well, what do I have done different? You know, I am who I am, and you know, each one of those is different in a complementary way, and we're very different from each other. But that difference is our strength. Yes.
The naive sort of assessment of selling RenderMan is that you're enabling your competition. Can you explain kind of how you look at that internally and why you continue to believe that that's the right strategy for the company and why it helps to raise the level of excellence at Pixar?
Well, with any piece of software like that, it requires a great deal of work to keep it in a good place. And we have a lot of things going on. There's certain things that we actually invented in the first place, but now we buy commercially. When we did the first paint programs and the first compositing, right? But in fact, we don't do them. We do them as commercial products. It is to our advantage to have an industry-wide standard. If we didn't sell it, there would be another one. And then it would be a pain in the neck because we would be different than the rest of the studio in something that needs to be across the studio and now across two studios. So in that case, we're better off having the industry-wide standard. For me, the technology is part of the culture. We have some competitive advantage in several of the things we do with technology, but I do think that the biggest competitive advantage is the way we work have the technology and the creative work together. The things I've been talking about is actually the thing that if somebody hears it, they'll probably copy the wrong piece of it. So like, you know, I can tell them something what's important. It won't matter, you know, because they'll just say, "Oh, I understand that. The story is the most important thing." And that, in fact, is the thing. If somebody else figures it out, then they'll make good stories. We're also in a funny industry where the competitors are competitors for the weeks that you're out, and the rest of the year you actually want them to do well. If people go to movies and they have a bad experience, as a competitor's movie, have a bad experience, then that sort of takes away their enjoyment from going to the movies. And if they have a lot of bad experiences, they won't go to movies. If they go and have a great time, then they'll want to go more. So we want our competitors to do well, except when our movie's out. All right, then they can burn and die. Thank you.